In this video I'm going to go through general steps for drawing a basic bar stool. It's important to keep in mind that when you're drawing your bar stool, you're going to need to have your initial design sketch or your final design sketch with all your key dimensions ready to go so that you can utilize those dimensions within your bar stool drawing. Now, as always in Onshape, we're going to go into the Create menu and create a new document, and we're going to name it Bar Stool and click on Create. Once our document opens up, I'm going to set up our part studios like I have in previous videos. So for this particular bar stool, I'm going to just do a basic four-legged stool. The four legs are all going to be identical to each other, so I'm not going to have longer back legs or anything like that. I'm just going to have four identical legs. I'll have 8 identical rails, so 4 along the bottom, 4 along the top, and then I'll have a top on the bar stool. So that means I'm going to need to have a part studio for my 4 identical legs, and I'm going to need to have a part studio for my 8 rails, my 4 top, 4 bottom. Alright, for this particular one I'm just going to make all 8 rails identical. You can change that in your design just like you can with the leg design. And I will then have a third part studio for the top. So I'm going to add 2 more part studios, and as I have in previous videos, I'm going to name each of them based on the parts I'm going to draw in them. So I'm going to start with the legs. I'll name the other one rails, and my last one is going to be my top. So with our legs, for my particular bar stool, I'm going to do it similar to the teacher work sample that we've got down in the workshop with some 42 by 42 millimeter legs. So I'm going to start with a top view and do a sketch and start just with my 42 by 42 profile. So as I have in previous videos, I'm going to draw a center point rectangle, 42 by 42, type those measurements in and hit enter, and I'm going to accept that sketch by clicking on the tick, and I'm then going to extrude my legs to the total height that I need them to be. Now I'm going to make my legs 700 millimeters long, and I'm going to accept that. So you can now see I've got my basic leg design. Now I'm going to go through a couple of basic modifications we can do this. I'm also going to go through how we put in the joinery. So for my bar stool, I'm going to use mortise and tenon joinery. So really common joinery for a frame like this. An alternate option would be to do dominoes. If you're doing domino joinery for this, okay, you could draw all the dominoes in very similar to this mortise and tenon, and I'll show you how to do that in this video as well. So I'm going to start off with my rails before I come back and draw the mortise and tenon joinery, because I'm going to need a bit of detail about the size of my rails before I start drawing in where the tenons are going to go. So let's go across to my rails for now. My rails are all going to be 200 millimeters from the inside of the leg, so they'll all be 200 millimeters long. Because I'm doing mortise and tenon joinery though, I need to allow the extra on the end of the rails. There's 2 ways you can draw them. You could draw just your 200 millimeter long rail, and then we can extrude and add the tenons, or we can do it the other way around. We can add the extra length we need for the tenon to the rail. So say each tenon was going to be 20 millimeters long, we could add 20 millimeters to each end, so we get a 240 millimeter long rail, and then we can use the extrude tool to remove what we don't need from the tenons. I find the easiest thing to do, because it's less math, is to just draw your rails as if there were no tenons on them, and then we add the tenons by extruding and adding additional length to them. So I'm going to use my sketch tool. This time I'm going to use the front axis. I'm going to start with my rectangle to get my basic 2D shape. So I want them to be 200 long, as I just said, and I'm going to make mine, I believe from memory, they work out to be about 45 or 50. I'm going to go with 50 wide. Okay, I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to go and extrude. These rails are going to be 19 millimeters thick. So I'm just going to double check that. Nope, I hit enter before typing the 19 properly. Enter, accept. So there we go. I could have always come back and changed that later. So now I've got my basic rail. So now I'm going to start on the tenons on the end here. So I'm going to use my sketch tool to select this end view, and I'm also going to put it in the right view. So I've got a nice 2D, very clear image of the end, like I usually do, so it's nice and easy to come back and change these if I need to. I'm going to use my offset tool. So I'm going to offset 5 millimeters down. Actually no, let's make that 10. So I've got to make sure it's going downwards. Click again, I'm going to offset 10. I'm going to do the same offset from the bottom. Make sure it's going inwards. 10. Okay, and now I'm going to do my offsets in the other way. So it's a third of the thickness. So it's a bit of a weird number. Rather than doing a third, let's make it a little bit easier. If it's 19, if I come in 5 and 5, it would end up being 9. If I come in 6 and 6, it ends up being 7. So let's come in 6.5 each way, and you end up with a 6 mil tenon. So make sure we're going inwards. Click again. I'm going to make it 6.5, and I'll do the same from the other end. Click again. 6.5. Enter. Alright, so now I've got the parameters for my tenon, which will be this bit in the middle, to be able to extrude it outwards as deep as I want it to go into my other piece. So I'm going to accept it. I'm going to go back to this view so I can see what it's doing. I'm going to use my extrude tool, add, and I'm going to make these 20 millimeters long. And I'm going to go and click on that little rectangle in the center, and that'll be my tenon. Now if I wanted to do haunched mortise and tenons, I could then use my sketch tool again and click on the end. Alright, I could go and do my offset tool. Let's say I wanted to put a 5mm haunch on this. Type in my 5. Okay, accept that sketch, and then I could extrude this little bit, and I could remove, let's say I take off 10mm for example. Okay, and now I've got a haunched mortise and tenon. Okay, so it'll completely come down to the joinery that you are doing in your bar stool. Okay, and whether you've worked out your tenons are going to foul each other, or if you're doing haunches, or whatever joinery you're doing, but I just thought I would demonstrate that while I'm here doing a tenon. I'm just going to do some basic tenons. I'm going to go back and delete that extrusion and delete that sketch. Now, I need to do the same thing I did here on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to spin it round, and I'm going to do my sketch here. So same thing, offset from the top, down 10mm, offset from the bottom, up 10mm. Okay, and then I offset in 6.5, 5, and the other side 6.5. Okay, accept, come in here, and I'm going to add 20mm. Okay, so that's my basic rail. Okay, I've got a tenon on each end, and I've got a very basic rail. We're going to come back and jazz it up a little bit later. I'm going to show you a couple of things we can do to it to make it a bit nicer, but that's a very basic rail shape with some tenons on the end. Okay, and most importantly, I know all of the dimensions for where my tenon goes. Okay, so I know it's 10 millimeters down and 6.5 millimeters in. Now it's time to go back and add some mortises to my legs. So let's go to the legs. I'm going to add my mortises to these inside faces. I'm going to call these the inside ones. Right, the mortises are going to go towards the outside of both of these faces. So not close to this edge, they're going to go close to the outer edge on each of these faces. So I'm not going to put them in the absolute middle. If I put them in the very middle, I'm quite sure, not 100% sure, but quite sure the tenons will run into each other. So I'm actually going to offset them a little bit. Now I know from this rail that 6.5 millimeters from the edge gets you to the tenon. So if I want them to finish flush on the outside edges, what I would do is I would start off by doing a sketch with a offset line inwards. That's 6.5 millimeters. 6.5. Okay, so now I know as long as I make the mortise starting from this line, okay, the rail will finish perfectly flush with the outside. If I don't want it to finish flush and I want it to be inset a little bit, which I think is a more desirable look, it also allows a bit more room for error with your mortises. So if you make a mistake, it's not so obvious, whereas if you're trying to get a flush finish, it's quite obvious when you make a mistake because there'll be a step. I'm going to change that from 6.5. I'm going to have it go in an extra 5 millimeters. So I've got to add 5 millimeters to that 6.5. That takes me to 11.5. Press enter. So that's where my mortise is going to start. The top mortise is then going to be the same offset down. So it's going to be 10 millimeters, which was the offset that we had for the tenon in the rail drawing. Now I need to check how long that tenon is and how wide it is. So if I go back to my rail, remember I can use my measure tool to click on lines. So I know my tenons are 30 mil high and they are, I believe, 6 millimeters wide. Yep, 6 millimeters wide. Okay, so I've gone back, I've measured those. I can go back to my leg now and I know that if I do an offset line down 30 millimeters, that'll be the correct size. And I need to do an offset line from this one here going inwards 6 millimeters. Okay, so I've got that mortise location. I also need a mortise for the lower rails. Now my lower rails, I'm going to have the top of the mortise 240 millimeters from the bottom of my leg. So again, if I keep going with this sketch and I use my offset tool from the bottom and I go 240 up, that's the top of the mortise, and I know the mortise needs to be 30 mil tall, so I'm going to do another offset from this line downwards 30 millimeters. Okay, I now have my mortise location and my mortise location here. Okay, again, if we need to modify those at any point, we can always go and change those offsets later on. Okay, now it's time to use our extrude tool. We're going to remove, and we know that our tenons are 20 millimeters long, so we need to remove 20 millimeters from these locations. So I'm going to click one there and one there and accept. So there's our mortises on one face. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing on the other face. So I'll go a little bit quicker this time. So I'm going to click on the face that I need. I'm going to do some offsets. Down 10. Okay. Do another offset from the outside edge. Going inwards. So remember it was 6.5 plus 5, which is 11.5. Then we need our 30 millimeters down and 6 millimeters across. And we'll go down and do the bottom one. So make sure it's going the right way. So it was 240 up and 30 down. Done. Tick the sketch. Go and use our extrude tool. We're removing the tenons with 20 millimeters. Okay, go and click on the 2 rectangles. Okay, done. Now we can very quickly check whether or not the tenons are going to run into each other by right-clicking and dragging, and we can see that we can very clearly see the back of that mortise. Alright, and we can't see another mortise that's sort of hitting it. Okay, well, the other thing we can do is we should be able to highlight this whole thing. We right click it, and if you make it transparent, I think we need to make it a little more transparent than that. It's not letting me do it. Let's get out of the transparency. No, we don't want to use the section view. Apologies guys, I'm just trying to remember how we can have a closer look at what's going on the inside. Well, we might have to do it in the assembly section a bit later. But it is quite clear when we rotate and we have a look in there. You'd be able to see at this angle, there'd be the other mortise. You'd kind of be able to see the hole if they ran into each other. Alright, so we've got our 2 mortises. Go back to our standard view. I'm going to go into the assembly now and I'm going to put all of that together so that then any aesthetic changes I make, I'm not just looking at how it looks on an individual part, I'm looking at how it looks on the entire stool assembly. So I've got a very basic leg with tenons, very basic rail, very basic leg with mortises, very basic rail with tenons, okay, and they're ready to be assembled. So let's go to our assembly. As we have in previous videos, we insert, and we need to insert as many of each part that we need. Now, this is one time where I would say it's probably not the best idea to insert everything, because you're going to have 4 legs and 8 rails, so you're going to have 12 parts here at once. What I would suggest instead is to make a couple of separate assemblies. So let's start off by just making an end assembly. So 2 legs, 4 rails, a little bit more manageable. So let's put a leg and a leg. Let's just put 4 rails over here. And we've got all the parts that we need for now, so we're going to hit tick on the Insert Assemblies menu. First thing I'm going to do before I start rotating anything, because it's a little confusing what direction we've got to rotate stuff, I'm just going to attach this rail and this rail straight into this mortise and this mortise, because they're in the correct orientation to go straight in there. So the easiest way to do this is to, as always, use our Fastened Mate tool, but we need to select the point on the tenon that's going to meet the outside point of the mortise. That will give us the least amount of fiddling with the camera angle that we're using to get these together. So, Fastened Mate tool, remember that mates them together like they're glued. I'm going to click on it. Remembering we're looking at the 3-point axis, I like to try and keep the blue line straight up, but whatever orientation you have it in, it needs to be the same when you click on the other point. So I've got the bottom right hand point. I'm actually going to go the bottom left hand because I think that will be a little bit easier to see on the tenon. So if I click there, I then need to go and rotate slightly so I can go to this point, making sure that the blue point, the blue line, sorry, on the axis is up, and I'm going to click, and you see they snap together. Alright, and I'm going to rotate around so I can check it, and you'll notice I've actually clicked on the wrong point. So I've connected the top of the tenon to the bottom of the mortise. Alright, and so it's wonky. So I'm going to want to cross that, and let's give that another try. So I actually needed this top corner. So I'm going to click on the axes there, making sure the blue is upright. Zoom back out, rotate, and I want that top corner, blue axes up, click, and now you can see I'm perfectly aligned at the top, and I've got a little inset, okay, and everything's correct. So I'm going to tick. Before I go too far with the assembly, I just want to show you there's a way that you can check that you have assembled everything correctly. So I'm going to close the fastening tool and just move these parts out of the way. If you highlight a part of an assembly, okay, you can right click on it, and we have a section in the menu here that says check interference. What that does is Onshape scans all of the parts in that assembly, and it's looking for anything that is overlapping where it shouldn't. So for example, what I did with that first mating where the tenon wasn't inside the mortise, it was literally protruding into the leg. If I checked for interference, then it would tell me exactly where it's interfering and will highlight it red. If these are in the correct place, nothing should get highlighted red. It should say there's no interference. So I'm going to click on check interference, and down here where it says interferences, we've got no interferences. Okay, if I put that in the wrong spot, alright, it would come up with interferences. It would tell me which parts are interfering with each other, and it would say the exact amount, and it will also highlight it in red. Okay, so if you're not sure if you put it in the right spot and you think that they're hitting each other, you can highlight all of it, right click it, check for, you can check for interference. Okay, and if you have no interferences, then they are in the correct spot. So let's get back to mating them. So using my fasten mate tool, I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. So let's do this top corner, rotate around and do that top corner. Okay, so we've got two. Now this is where we've got to start doing some rotations. This leg, if it was going to join to these two, okay, I'm going to need to rotate it. So let's get out of the fastened mate. Let's click on that leg. We don't want to rotate it this way. That's useless to us. So I'll put that back to 0. We don't want to rotate it this way. That's also useless. Put that back to 0. We need to rotate it on this axis. Now, which way do we need to go? If we go that way, it's not pointing the correct way to join to those rails that are already joined. We need to bring it around in this direction, and we need to rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm going to type in 90, tick, and then I can click elsewhere. Now I can change the view so I can see the mortises that I need to use to attach, and I only need to attach one of them to a tenon, and that will snap that whole leg and align everything. So I'm going to pick this top right hand corner, blue axis up, click, zoom out, go to the corresponding tenon, top right hand corner, blue axis up, click, and we snapped that leg on there, tick, and we'll get out of the fasten menu and go back to our front right view. So you can see now we've got one end frame together. Okay, if I now insert another pair of legs over here, okay, if I do the opposite end frame, so I rotate these how I need to do the opposite end frame and attach all of the rails into that, then all I've really got left to do is throw the 4 rails in here and then join that end frame to that end frame. So I'm just going to go through now. I'm not going to talk through it too much. It's a lot of rotating and just clicking in the right spots with our fastened mate tool. It's exactly the same process as what I've just done, just requiring a little bit more rotating and sort of looking at the parts and working out what way do I need to rotate them to get them aligned correctly. So legs first. This one needs to go a full 180 degrees that way. So I've got one mortise facing towards these ones and then another mortise facing towards there. So let's make it 180. Okay. And then this one needs to go that way, but only 90 degrees. Done. Now I'm good to fasten them together. So let's use that one to there. And then we'll do that one to here. Tick. And last one should just be go there to there. Tick. Okay, so now we've got two opposite end frames together. Get out of the mate menu. Now I just need to grab 8 more rails. 2. Oh, not 8, sorry, 4 more. And I've got to do some rotations. So all of them have got to rotate 90 degrees. Not that way. Back to 0. Make sure I use the rotation, which is the circle on the end. 90. And this one. 90. Okay, they're all rotated. Last step, let's mate them all. So that is going to mate with that. Of course I've selected. So see how after I've ticked it, while it moved over there, as soon as I ticked it, because it already had mates that it wasn't allowed to move away from, everything went back to snapping to those. So don't stress too much if when you first do it, stuff moves and you go, oh no, I've done the wrong thing. You haven't done the wrong thing. You can check it by, so see there, that leg snapped away and you go, oh no, I've done the wrong thing. I've ruined. I'll zoom back in so we can see I've ruined that assembly. But the minute I hit this tick, okay, it all moves back together. Okay, so don't stress if it looks like you've done the wrong thing when you do that first initial join. Okay, it's going to move. As soon as you solve it, okay, it'll continue to keep everything together. I've got one more to go here. 1, 2, solve it. Alright, so now we have one more join. If I join any one of these tenons to this end rail, everything will then be together. So, last one, let's do this bottom corner. So that's got to join to this bottom corner like that. Tick. And there's my whole thing together. Okay, and we've got a very basic assembled stool frame. Okay, if I highlight the whole thing as we talked about before, we'll get out of the fasten tool, drag, click and drag to highlight everything. We can right click it, check for interference. We've got no interferences because everything fits together how it should. Okay, so that's my basic stool. Very, very basic, absolutely no design modifications. Okay, no fouling of the tenons. So in the next video, I'm going to go through how we can spice some of these up and make them a bit nicer, not so blocky and basic, and add some design features. So I'll go through a couple of different options that you can do to modify a basic stool like this. There's endless possibilities, but I'm going to go through a few. See you in the next video.